Hello friends, my name is Katie. Welcome back to my channel, Life Between Words. We are here today to talk about my top 10 books that I read in 2020. I like to do 10. There's always more that could be on this list, and I'm doing something new this year. I made the agonizing choice to put these books in order from my least favorite of my most favorites of the year to my most favorite. Choosing my top book of the year was hands down the easiest decision. My number one could be no other book than the book that is my number one. Ranking the other books was a little bit more challenging, but I did it, and I did it for the very first time. I've never ranked my books in order. I kind of want to make this disclaimer. Even though I've ranked these in order, this is the order today. If I were to rank these again tomorrow, it could be a different order. It might even be that there was another book that I had edged out that I might put back in. But you know, a list has to be made, and this is the list today. So with that, let's get into it. Coming in at number 10, we have The Dearly Beloved by Kara Wall. This was a highly anticipated book for me. I actually expected this to be higher up on the list. And obviously, it was one of my favorites of the year, so it was great. Truly, truly one of the best books I read this year. The reason it's not higher on this list, though, is just, like, I didn't close the page and think, oh my gosh, favorite of all time. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this was a deeply profound novel that was beautifully written and with very well-developed, well-rounded characters that I grew to love. The writing, however, gorgeous. The story, beautiful. It follows co-pastors. These two men co-pastor a Presbyterian church in Greenwich Village. They meet in 1973. No, they meet in 1963. I thought that this book was going to explore the faith of these two men and their families. And while it does explore belief and unbelief and doubt. All those things are present realities in this book, and they are explored beautifully. But more than that, it explores friendship, it explores marriage, probably most of all, and it also just explores like relationships in general. So we don't just follow these two men, we also get to know their wives. And we get to know their wives' relationships, both with their husbands and with each other. And it really is, I mean, that is what this book is about. If you love good character-driven novels, I would almost put this book into like a family drama sort of genre. But if you like books like that, wow, would I highly, highly recommend this book. They go through big life struggles both in their marriage and with their children. And boy, it was just really beautifully done. I need to stop talking about it and move on because that was number 10, and we've got far, far to go, my friends. Number 9 on this list is a book I just finished, and I feel a little funny. Usually you need to let books sit and marinate for a while before you consider them a favorite of the year, but I had to include this book. Last week, I finished After the Flood by Cassandra Montag. This is a book that I would consider to be part of a sub-genre called hopeful post-apocalyptic books. So any post-apocalyptic book you read is going to be bleak, right? Because that's just part of the genre. But there is this sort of subgenre of post-apocalyptic books that mixed in with that grief is this sense of hope and endurance and, you know, what makes life worth living. I loved the exploration of that in this book. I found it particularly poignant when it came to motherhood, parenthood, in the midst of, you know, like chaos reigning because humanity has fallen apart. In this book, we follow Myra and her daughter Pearl. They are in search of Myra's oldest daughter, whose name is Ro. And when the earth began to flood, that's how this post-apocalypse happened. When the earth began to flood, Myra's husband took Ro and disappeared. And Myra was left pregnant. She hadn't had Pearl yet. And obviously, that was devastating and really defined her existence until we meet her in this book and, you know, she begins to go on this quest to find her daughter. Their existence is, you know, lived on the water, and then every once in a while they go to an outpost in one of the few areas that's still on land to trade and things like that. She ends up with a group of people to go find her daughter. She has for many years lived independently and relied only on herself, trusted no one except for herself and her daughter. And so this is a lot about Myra learning to trust and learning what it means to live in community. And that part of it is really beautiful. There is this quote towards the end of the book, and Myra is having a conversation with a man named Daniel. She's talking about how broken she is. And this is something that Daniel says, and I feel like it encapsulates parenthood really beautifully. Like, it's really, it's sad in a way, but also beautiful and true. You aren't hurting because you have no heart. You're hurting because you're carrying two other hearts in you. You'll always have them. You'll always have to carry them. They're your gift and your burden. I just think that that quote is beautiful, and the exploration of parenthood in this book is just lovely. This book is devastating and raw, but it's also beautiful and hopeful. I would say tread lightly with this book if you struggle hearing about bad things happening to kids. I struggle with hearing about bad things that happen to kids, and that's what I mean when I say that this book is raw. It is raw and emotional, and I cried. It doesn't end in a place where you're so depressed that you feel like, you can't get out of bed. It's wonderful. If you like Station 11, give this one a chance. Number 8 is Giver of Stars by Jojo Moyes. I am actually a little bit shaken that a Jojo Moyes book ended up on my favorites of the year list, but I'll tell you why it did. I'll tell you why I'm surprised first. I'm surprised because Me Before You, also by Jojo Moyes, is one of my least favorite books that I've ever read. But this book is just so wonderful. It's such a good story. It follows such amazing, strong, resilient women characters, and the friendships in this book are so good. Many of you have probably read this book because it was pretty hyped this year. Jojo Moyes is a very well-known, well-loved author. This book follows the pack horse librarians, or some pack horse librarians in the 1930s in Kentucky. It was a traveling library, basically, started by Eleanor Roosevelt to bring literacy to the rural mountains of Kentucky. And so basically these women were sent out on horseback to bring books to these people that didn't have access to books or reading or libraries or things like that. And this book follows the women from this town. It's very dramatic. There's even a little bit of a courtroom drama towards the end of this book. There's also a little bit of a romance. Nevertheless, I loved this book. It was fantastic. I had a hard time deciding between The Giver of Stars and After the Flood as to their place, so those are almost interchangeable, those two. Number 7 is another one that I just finished, but I loved it so much because, oh my goodness, it just brought so much warmth to my heart. It was The Last Christmas in Paris by Hazel Gaynor. This is an epistolary novel. It takes place during World War I, which is a time period that I'm not sure I'd ever read a novel in World War I. That might not be true, but it's been a while. It's a collection of letters written mostly between a young woman named Evie and a young man named Thomas, who has been sent to the front. Evie is independent, a little bit rebellious, and she is also a budding reporter, and so she begins to report on the war. Thomas is her brother's best friend, and they grew up knowing each other. And so they've known each other for a long time, but they get to know each other better through these letters. It is a love story and also just a story of life during this time. It reminded me a lot of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. It had that same sort of feeling where there are moments in the book that are just so sad and heart-wrenching, but also there's this overwhelming sense of warmth and delight as you're reading. It's just such a special book. You guys might know this. I know I've talked about the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. That is such a tongue twister of a title. I've talked about it many times. I love that book. It's one of my favorites, and I would put this one right up there with that. It is such a good epistolary novel. I never thought that I would be someone that, loves novels written in letter form, but I do. Number 6 on the list is a classic, And one of the only classics I think I read this year, North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I have read several Elizabeth Gaskell books now, and I think they've all ended up on my favorites list. No, Mary Barton did not. But Wives and Daughters is one of my favorite classics of all time, and now North and South is too. It is so good. It is so wonderful. While Wives and Daughters is reminiscent more of like a Jane Austen in its tone and sort of its domestic life, or its commentary on domestic life, I guess. And Mary Barton is more like a Dickens in its sort of gritty Victorian novel romance. That one is really gritty, a la Dickens. This one is, I would say, somewhere in between. It definitely has the grittiness of a Victorian novel. It also has some of the feeling of a Jane Austen, especially in the romance between the main character, whose name is Margaret Hale, and her love interest, John Thornton. This book is very social justice oriented as well. So the premise of this book is that Mary Hale and her father move north to this factory town from London. And it's a shock. It's so different. Life is different. The people are different. The wealth gap is different. You know, there's these wealthy factory owners and these workers who are finding their voice and also, you know, rebelling against the factory owners. And Margaret Hale finds herself sort of in the middle of this. And she gets entangled in a love-hate relationship with one of the factory owners named John Thornton, and it is just brilliant. I loved this book. I still have yet to watch the miniseries, but I have heard that the miniseries is excellent. Elizabeth Gaskell is just such a treat and a delight to read. Her stories are engaging, and like I said, they are so readable and wonderful. Just such a good classic.
Can I say hello?
You want to say hello? All right. Fox wants to say hello.
I just turned 6.
No, you didn't just turn 6.
Yeah, I
You turned 6 almost a year ago. You're almost 7.
do.
You know, when I first started this channel, you were younger than Wilder.
What?
Yep, and you would climb around behind me on the bookshelf.
That must be really funny.
I'll show you the videos sometime.
Okay.
All right, now say goodbye because I want to finish this up.
Bye.
All right, we are losing light fast, my friends, so I need to get a move on. Did you just blow a raspberry?
No, I didn't.
Go on, sir. We are now in the top 5. Coming in at number 5 is The War I Finally Won by Kimberly Brubaker Bradley. That is a mouthful of a name. But I can say with assurance that Kimberly Brubaker Bradley is one of my favorite middle grade authors. Everything she writes, and I've read a few of her books now, is just excellent. This is the conclusion to her World War II duology about a young girl named Ava who with her brother is sent out of London during the bombing raids to live in the country because that happened during World War II. If you've read Narnia, you know that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Pevensies are also sent away out of London to avoid the bombing raids. Anyway, so Ava and her brother leave London. Ava's mother is a very abusive woman. They end up with a woman named Susan who wasn't expecting children. She's one of those characters who is a little bit hard on the outside, but is very soft and loving on the inside. And the more you get to know her, the more you come to understand her capacity for love. I just love this duology so much, and this was a fantastic conclusion to the series. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you what happens in this book because it is the second in this duology. If you're looking for really high quality middle grade novels, you could not find a better place to start than The War That Saved My Life and The War I Finally Won. They are just so excellent. Number 4 is another middle grade novel, and oh my gosh, this is one of my favorite middle grade novels that I think I have ever read. And guess what? It's another epistolary. Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth by Sheila O'Connor is an epistolary novel about a little girl named Renee who moves to live with her grandmother for the summer in Minnesota. It takes place during the Vietnam War. While she's living with her grandmother for the summer, she decides to start a paper route. And on this paper route, one of the papers that she delivers is to this old man who is kind of a recluse. And they strike up an unlikely friendship through letters. He is grumpy and he doesn't really want to get to know Renee, but of course Renee is very precocious and very persistent. That is sort of the starting place of this book, but it also explores what it means to be a pacifist. This takes place during the Vietnam War, like I said, and they have started the draft, and Renee really, really wants her older brother to go to college so that he can avoid being drafted into the Vietnam War. And it's one of the things that she ends up talking about in her letters with Mr. Marsworth. This story is beautiful and heartwarming. I love the trope of young, precocious children befriending grumpy old people. There's just something about that I find completely endearing and engrossing, and this book does it some of the best that I've seen. It's not like I've actually read a ton of books like that, I just tend to like it. So yeah, this book is so good. If you are a fan of The Wednesday Wars by one of my other favorites, Gary Schmidt, read Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth. If you are a fan of A Man Called Uva, read Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth. This is just such a good book. I cannot recommend it more highly. I loved it. It has stayed with me, and I cannot wait to reread it. And that is the mark of a favorite book, if I want to reread it. Number 3 is The Lager Queen of Minnesota. Now I'm wondering, after talking about Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth, whether I should have put this at number 4 and that as number 3, but it's okay. It is what it is. The Lager Queen of Minnesota is what I would classify as Midwestern fiction. J. Ryan Stradall has also written another book called Kitchens of the Great Midwest, so he writes Midwestern fiction. I don't know if he lives, no, I actually think he lives in California now, but he's from the Midwest, and so there is a strong Midwestern feel to these books, and I just love them. Being from the Midwest myself, there is something about seeing yourself and your part of the country represented in books that just makes me want to sing. I loved this book. It is so much fun. It is about beer brewing, which sounds, I am not interested in beer brewing. I mean, I'm from Wisconsin, so I get it, right? Like, I understand beer culture. My husband loves craft beer from microbreweries. So does my dad. So do both my brothers. Like, it's a thing here. I, however, am not interested. But I still loved the story, and because I'm still part of that Midwestern culture, I get it. I get the craft brewery thing, but you don't have to like beer to like this book. It's about a family. It's also about a family feud between two sisters, and one of the sisters ends up taking in her granddaughter whose parents tragically die. That happens right at the beginning of the book. Sorry if you don't like to know anything going in, but you have to know that relationship to kind of be given the premise of the book. So as this young girl grows up, she learns to love craft beer, and she learns to love making craft beer. And ultimately, at one point in the book, all of these old women, this young woman's grandmother and all of her grandmotherly friends begin brewing craft beer. It is just so good and so heartwarming and so redemptive. This book explores forgiveness, and it also explores redemption a lot. There are so many points in this book in which the characters go through some sort of redemption, and it's just wonderful. I loved it. I can't wait to read more J. Ryan Stradall because this was so utterly charming and delightful. Number 2 was such a surprise for me. I cannot even tell you what a big surprise this book was. This book wasn't on my radar at all. I think I got this book in 2019. And I'd heard about it briefly on Krista's channel, Books and Jams. She mentioned this at one point. She has not mentioned it very much, but she mentioned this in one video, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. I'd like to read that. So I got it. It's Christian fiction, and I don't read a lot of Christian fiction. I'm not necessarily entirely opposed to it. I just find that a lot of times it's kind of trite and saccharine and a little bit too sentimental for me. I like sentimental. I've been talking about how delightful and warm a lot of these favorites are, so, but there's a difference between saccharine, which is overly sweet, and delightful and heartwarming, right? There's gotta be some tragedy in order for something to end up charming and delighting you, in my opinion. So anyway, that's just my own interpretation of that. Okay, moving along. I still need to mention the book I'm talking about. Iscariot by Tosca Lee. Like I said, this book completely took me by surprise. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did, and I think that's partly why this ended up as my number 2, because it it knocked me off my feet. I was not expecting to love this book. I was not expecting this book to be as profound or as well written as it was. So this book is about Judas Iscariot. For those of you who are not familiar with the Christian tradition, Judas Iscariot is the disciple that betrayed Jesus. He is the one who turned him over to the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders, who ended up killing him. This is his imagined story, because obviously we don't know much about Judas Iscariot. We know some things about all the disciples, but we don't know a lot, right? So this is an imagined history. This is an imagined story of, what may have motivated Judas Iscariot, what motivated him in his early life, what attracted him to Jesus, how he ended up as one of Jesus' best friends, one of the 12 disciples, and ultimately what led him to betray Jesus. I would say this is a very sympathetic view of Judas, but I loved that about it. In this book, Judas is complicated. You also understand in this interpretation of Judas that his love for Jesus was genuine, but he had become disillusioned. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Even if you are not a Christian, if you do not consider yourself a Christian, this is not a preachy book. It assumes the miracles of Jesus, but it's not trying to convert you. It is not about conversion at all. It really is just about the life of Judas Iscariot, and it is so excellently done. After I read this book, I handed it to my mom. My mom is a really hard sell for everything. Like TV books, it's hard to hand her something. I never know whether I'm going to hand her something and whether she's going to enjoy it. But I handed her this book with a little trepidation, but I had a feeling that it was going to hit the mark with her, and oh boy did it. She ended up reading it twice, back to back, which just kind of shocked me. So this book was so good, very thought-provoking. I loved it. And finally, coming in at number 1, I have not had the opportunity to even talk about this book on my channel, which shocks me because this is by far and away my favorite book that I read this year. It is not even a competition. A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Oh my word, this book entered my life at just the right time. I read this book, I think in May, either April or May, I read A Gentleman in Moscow. And it blew my socks off. It was just what I needed, partially because it felt familiar. I was really having a hard time at the beginning of quarantine because every book and every media that I was consuming, people weren't isolating, people weren't socially distancing, and it felt like there was this cognitive dissonance happening with me. So in this book, we follow a man named Count Rostov, who was part of the gentry in Russia before the Bolsheviks took over. The opening of this book is him facing a tribunal, basically, and he is sentenced to life in house arrest. And he's living at the Metropole Hotel. So they put him in the Metropole Hotel and they say, you can't ever leave or you will be shot. And so the entire book basically takes place in the Metropole Hotel. And I think because I was reading this in isolation, that particular aspect of it really hit home with me because he wasn't allowed to leave his house. He was able to interact with the other people in the hotel, but he wasn't allowed to leave. And so it felt familiar, it was comforting. But beyond that, the writing was so good. This book is clever, and it's funny, and it's charming, and it's delightful. I fell in love with every single character in this book. Count Rostov is one of my favorite characters I've ever read. This book, to me, is a masterpiece from start to finish. It has taken top spot on my shelf. I love this book so much. If I were to name my top 3 favorite books of all time, it would be Anne of Green Gables, Peace Like a River, and A Gentleman in Moscow. I cannot sing the praises of this book more highly. I loved it. So there you have it. My favorite book of the year. And I just have to say, I finished this book, I set it down for a month, and then I had the opportunity to do a Zoom call with Amor Towles. He saw my review of it on Instagram and he contacted me and he was like, hey, would you like to have a discussion on Zoom for some of your followers? And I was like, yes, please. And I was having a huge fangirl moment. I still get all jittery inside thinking about it because I just couldn't believe my fortune, how fortunate I was that happened. So that took place in June, and I reread the book in preparation. So I read this book twice this year, and I never do that. I cannot tell you the last time I read a book, set it down for a month, and then picked it up to read again and loved it just as much. This book to me is perfection. I loved it. I can't think of anything more interesting to say than just, I loved this book. I literally gave this book a hug when I finished it because that's how it made me feel inside. I was overflowing. Just such a joy to read. Everything about it. Like, I could go on and on. Friends, we have made it to the end of my top 10 for 2020. Tell me below, of all these books that I talked about, which one interests you the most? Have you read any of these books? Did you dislike any of these books? Which of these books did you love? I would love to chat with you in the comments. And if you haven't read any of these books, let me know if I convinced you to read any of them. I would love to know if I have influenced you in any way. I cringe a little bit saying that, but I am really curious if, I piqued your interest. If you're not subscribed to my channel, I would love for you to subscribe, like this video, and I will talk to you guys in another video soon. Bye!